If you were born somewhere in the early 2000s, it's pretty much impossible for you to not have heard of this franchise. I'm of course talking about Skylanders, known for their simple gameplay and, more importantly, holy f***! This Toys to Life mechanic made it an absolute phenomenon throughout the 2010s, and I too was captured by its magic.
Could you tell?
And apparently I'm not the only one, seeing how many videos have been made about this franchise in recent years. And with there being so many opinions out there, and me only having played about half of the franchise before this, it really made me wonder, what is the best Skylanders game out there? So in order to find that out, I decided to play through every mainline Skylanders game released from 2011 to 2016, so that by the end of this video, I'll be able to rank all of them. So sit back, relax, and come along on this nostalgia trip through the magical world of the Skylands. The game that started it all is Skylanders Spyro's Adventure, where Spyro was used for the sole purpose of marketing and was then disposed of pretty quickly, considering the game doesn't even revolve around him. Instead, Spyro is part of a crew of 32 different Skylanders representing 8 elements, who are the protectors of the Skylands. Your enemy Chaos, however, manages to destroy the Core of Light, which is basically the heart of all the light Skylands, and he spreads its pieces throughout the world. Your job as a Portal Master is to use the Skylanders to return the pieces and restore the Core of Light to then defeat Chaos. The story is very simple but also very effective, with next to no filler content. Every level you visit definitely feels like it has a purpose. These levels and the enemies you fight within them are also themed accordingly to the 8 main elements of the game, and combined with an amazing soundtrack that really sets the tone for all these elements, the levels have an incredible atmosphere that is very much unique to Skylanders. And because of this atmosphere, a lot of the levels feel very memorable, even when compared to some of the levels in the later games. The Skylanders you play as are also very memorable, and they represent their respective elements really well. The original 32 will always have a certain charm that later characters tend to not have. Something about the characters and their personalities just makes for such a good time using them. And most of their movesets are very thought out as well, apart from the fact that a lot of the characters with wings just waste a move on their flying ability. The supporting cast of characters definitely makes the story a lot more fun to play through as well. Side characters like Flynn, the Mabu, and T-Bone definitely give this game a lot more charm, with some fun jokes spread throughout the script.
Long story. Tell you over some ribs.
Unfortunately, because Spyro's Adventure is the first game in the series, it does have quite a bit of teething problems. For example, while the atmosphere and theming of the levels works really well, there are quite a few of them with the same theming. Take these 3 undead levels for example. Visually, they're pretty difficult to tell apart, meaning they can start to feel a little repetitive. On top of that, in the first game your characters can jump, which results in a lot of the levels feeling pretty flat and undynamic. The gameplay is very much like a dungeon crawler. It works pretty well, but having played Giants and Trap Team before this one, the level design feels a bit bland sometimes. Another aspect in which you can see that this is the first game in the series is the fact that there is no option to change the difficulty, meaning this game for the most part is really easy, with the exception of a few boss fights. And some of the figures, well, let's just say the design department had some work to do. All in all though, I think Spyro's Adventure is a great introduction to the franchise, especially because the main cast of Skylanders and the feeling and atmosphere of this game really set the tone for all things to come. And most inconveniences were very easy to fix, which brings us to Skylanders Giants was my introduction to the franchise, which means I probably have quite a bit of nostalgia bias towards it, but I'll try to not let that get the upper hand. In Skylanders Giants, we are introduced to a new story with a new group of Skylanders. After banishing Chaos to Zambia? At the end of Spyro's Adventure, Chaos wakes up in a toy store and uses a portal of power to return to the Skylands. Nice bit of continuity there. When he returns, he accidentally powers up a 10,000-year-old Archean robot and uses it to find the Iron Fist of Arcus to control all the Archeans, which is an oppressive robot civilization introduced in Spyro's Adventure. And of course, his goal is to use the Archeans to take over the Skylands. Luckily, you as a Portal Master have found the Giants, who already beat the Archeans before. With their help, your job is to stop Chaos once again. Story-wise, I must say I very much prefer this one over Spyro's Adventure, because I feel the levels are a lot more connected here. The result of completing one level is always the cause for another. In Spyro's Adventure, it feels like the levels can be placed in a completely different order, as long as the levels that are tied to a specific element are placed right after one another. But if you were to do this in Giants, the story wouldn't make any sense, meaning it feels a lot more linear and thought out. Giants also made sure every level feels completely unique, with no repetitive theming and some really cool gimmicks, like controlling a giant Archean robot, switching between dimensions, and even flying a jet. There are also some insanely fun and memorable boss fights. I mean, fighting a giant rapping drill robot, it will not get better than this. And did I mention card games were starting to become part of the franchise here too? Now you can play Sky Stones against various NPCs, which is a really fun little addition that they even dedicated an entire level to. The new giant Skylanders are also introduced very smoothly, and the fact that they were banished from Skylands 10,000 years ago, but are yours to control now that you found them again. Speaking of the giants, they are really fun to use. They're basically all really tanky and powerful characters dealing a ton of damage, but being slow and having a giant hitbox at the same time. This means you can just feel the power they hold as you play, especially because they can kill chompies by just walking over them. There's also elements in the game that are only possible through the use of the giants, including feats of strength, picking up boulders, and not having to use bombs on certain gates. It's also pretty fun to see that design-wise, a lot of the giants seem to have a core counterpart. Tree-Rex is a tree-like stump smash, Hothead is a lava monster like Eruptor, and if you look very closely, you can see Ninjini is actually just as useless as Wrecking Ball. Giants also fix Spyro's Adventure's biggest problem, because you are finally able to select a difficulty ranging from easy to hard with an unlockable nightmare mode. This means the game can actually get quite challenging, making it more fun for different types of players. Hard and nightmare mode do have a drawback, unfortunately, because it will be a lot more difficult to properly use your giants. As I said, they're slow and have really big hitboxes, meaning you are basically a walking target, which doesn't combine well with the damage the enemies do on harder difficulties. Fortunately, the giants aren't mandatory, because you can still use the new cores and all your old Skylanders from Spyro's Adventure. They did lean a little too far into this in my opinion though, because Giants only introduced 16 new characters to the game, and the others were reposes of older Skylanders or light cores, meaning the roster is lacking a little. If you look at the complete picture though, Giants clearly is a superior sequel to Spyro's Adventure, with a better story, a new gimmick, and a lot of quality of life improvements. Giants to me might just be the game that encapsulates what Skylanders is the most, but there are still a couple of really good games coming, starting with the third game in the franchise is Skylanders Swap Force, one of the fan favorites, and boy oh boy does it have a fun gimmick. So in Skylanders Swap Force we are introduced to Swapper Skylanders. With these guys you can take apart the top and bottom and mix them around however you like. I don't know why, but this is just ridiculously fun. If you got a top and a bottom part you really like, you can make some incredibly strong combinations, or you can just create something that looks like it crawled out of the depths of hell. And there's a lot of them too. 2 swappers per element, and on top of that a good amount of new cores, making the roster of Swap Force one of the best in the franchise. And just look at how beautiful this game is. So, little Skylanders history lesson with Gamefish. Skylanders was originally planned to be a Nintendo exclusive, solely coming out for the Wii. Nintendo declined this offer, which meant there were also ports to be made for other consoles. But the first 2 games were still made with the Wii as its primary hardware in mind, meaning the games were targeted towards the Wii's capabilities. However, from Skylanders Swap Force onwards, the primary consoles would be those of the generation of the PS4, meaning the Skylanders games started to look pretty incredible compared to the first couple. This also opened the door to new physics, including knockback with certain attacks, and finally, jumping. And with the engine being a lot better, the combat feels a lot more polished. Unfortunately, these improvements also had a negative side, because the games were also still coming out for the Wii, but now that they weren't targeted to it anymore, it resulted in scenes like this. Huh. And my god does it look bad. Luckily, on the newer consoles the game works like a charm. The boss fights in the game are seriously good, and the fact that you fight against Chaos's mom is just hilarious to me. Sadly, these boss fights are seen as separate chapters to make it seem the game has more levels than it actually has. If you didn't count the boss fights, this game would only have 12 levels, and because of that, they are ridiculously long to still give you enough playtime. Some people might find this to be completely fine, but I personally am not a fan of it. The levels just drag on for so long at some points. Like, let me free these guys without having to walk around for almost 30 minutes. And on top of that, the levels once again have very repetitive theming. In Spyro's Adventure, this wasn't too much of a problem because there are 22 levels and they were fairly short. So if there's 3 levels with the same theming, it would at least not feel like it's a giant part of the game. But in Swap Force, you'll be playing levels with the same theming for almost 2 hours in some cases. Oh boy, I can't wait to see what awesome level design will pop up after playing desert levels for more than an hour. Oh. So for all the things this game improved on, there's also a lot of things Swap Force did worse in my opinion. It's still a very solid game, don't get me wrong, but for me personally, there were quite a few aspects of the game that really worsened the experience for me. Wait, what's that noise?
Oh, for f***'s sakes, it's just a game!
Oh, Skylanders Trap Team. This is going to be fun. Trap Team is the 4th game in the series, and I think this one has my favorite gimmick out of the entire franchise, because as the name already suggests, you can trap certain villains after defeating them in this game. And once they're trapped, you can switch out to them with the press of a button and actually use them to fight against enemies. This makes playing through the levels even more fun, since you are looking forward to trapping new villains with every level you start. The gimmick also plays a big part in the story, because to make it work, there have to be a lot of different enemies to capture. Which brings us to the main villains for most of this game, the Doom Raiders. Instead of going after chaos, the biggest part of this game is centered around stopping this group of villains led by the Golden Queen. Throughout the story you encounter all of them, which results in having a proper goal in the game and a shit ton of boss fights, which is never a bad thing. The level design is also a lot better than in Swap Force in my opinion, with snappier pace and next to no repetitive theming. And finally, the roster of this game is straight up incredible. We've got so many new characters, including Trap Masters, characterized by their giant crystal weapons, which honestly look really impressive on the figures. We also got a lot of great new cores, mini Skylanders, and even 2 entirely new elements in Light and Dark. There was just so much to collect for this game, which was really fun, but it also had some serious drawbacks. Trap Team released in 2014, which was right around the time the franchise peaked. Other companies like Disney had also jumped on the Toys to Life train, which meant the market was starting to get pretty saturated at this point. And with there being so much to collect for Trap Team, oversaturation was drawing near. Another aspect of the game that didn't help either were the elemental gates. Alright, history lesson with Gamefish Part 2. So, I haven't mentioned this before, but elemental gates are a pretty substantial aspect of the Skylanders franchise. How do they work? Well, Life Gate, Life Skylander, Bob's your uncle. These gates were themed aligning with their element, and it was a place where you can find treasure chests or magical hats that give your Skylander stat boosts. Up until Swap Force, these gates could be opened by any Skylander. In Swap Force there were split gates, but you could open these by using 2 controllers and using Skylanders of both elements as well. In Trap Team, however, to open an elemental gate, you need to use a Trap Master, and no other Skylanders will work. So you're telling me that my entire collection is just rendered useless, and I'm expected to buy 10 Trap Masters, as well as 11 traps, to be able to enjoy this game in its full form. I might as well throw all my old Skylanders in the garbage if this is how things are gonna be from now on. Oh yeah, and did I mention Trap Team is a broken mess already? The game is filled with weird glitches, bugs, and everything developers could get nightmares from. Some of them are fairly minor, but others will literally break your game. On the Wii version of the game, the boss fight against Dreamcatcher more often than not even causes your Wii to crash. If you manage to get a playthrough without any issues though, Trap Team is a very solid game with very few problems gameplay-wise. Honestly, if there were no glitches, this game would virtually be a perfect Skylanders game. But of course, Activision weren't about to quit when they're ahead. There's money to be made. So time to move on to... Wait, isn't this supposed to be one of the bad ones? Skylanders Superchargers, also known as the one with the cars, is a game in the franchise that nearly isn't talked about as much as most of the other games. It's not part of what some would call the golden era of Skylanders, but it's also not regarded as a bad game per se. Needless to say, my expectations were very low coming into this game, which is why I was very much surprised by how much I enjoyed playing through this one. Let's address the elephant in the room first. the vehicles. A big part of Superchargers consists of these sections where you control and fight vehicles instead of your regular Skylanders enemies. We've got land, sea and sky vehicles that all have their own parts in the levels. Only the land vehicles are necessary to complete the game, and I already spent enough money as is, so I didn't bother with the sea or sky sections, which means everything I'm going to say about vehicles from here on out only applies to the cars. I personally enjoyed the car sections quite a lot. It's a refreshing take on the franchise, and for the most part it works pretty well. Sure, the controls can be a little janky sometimes and the vehicle sections tend to drag on for a bit, but I still had some good fun with it. The levels themselves were solid as well, with some very cool mechanics and quite a few of them. Some levels felt really new because of this, while others really felt like the classic ones. There was definitely a good balance there. One thing I didn't like about the gameplay though is the fact that you take fall damage. Like, why? This was never a thing and it was revoked in Imaginators. The platforming in Skylanders doesn't always feel all too smooth, which really makes you think the developers were just messing with you. Gotta say, I'm a little disappointed. But it's all good because my biggest highlight of Superchargers by far is the story and the way the characters are written. I don't know why they didn't do this sooner, but instead of stopping Chaos from taking over again, Chaos actually has taken over the Skylands when you start the game, and now your goal is to overthrow him as Emperor. The side characters also feel like the most in character they've ever been. I've always found Flynn to be a funny character, but I laughed out loud multiple times when he was on screen during my playthrough.
Any ideas?
LaFuzzbottom!
What'd you call me?
You can just tell the writers had fun while writing the script. Which can also be seen in this character. Who's this, you may ask? Well, it's a person who likes collecting stuff, but is portrayed as batshit crazy. And what kind of people do you think like to play Skylanders? Well, fucking idiots for one.
What the hell?
And people who like collecting things. Which means the writers completely insulted their audience, and it's just fucking hilarious to me. The ending of the story also works so well. I'm gonna give a pretty major spoiler for this game now, so if you don't want to hear it, just skip to this minute. So, while Chaos is in power, the darkness keeps growing, and eventually becomes a sentient entity trying to manipulate Chaos, which even results in him firing his loyal assistant Glumshanks. By the end of the game, Chaos finally realizes what's going on and he turns against the darkness. But instead of the game being over after this, the darkness suddenly appears when the credits are rolling, and the final boss actually turns out to be the darkness itself, which makes this story a pretty perfect ending to the franchise, because well, what challenge could be bigger than defeating the darkness? Superchargers, in my opinion, definitely deserve some more love. A lot of people hate on the vehicles, but I think it's a pretty cool feature that fits the franchise really well. And with a story like this, I would have expected Skylanders fans to like this game a lot more. But even though this game feels like a very good conclusion, it's not the final game in the franchise. So what did Activision do for the franchise's big finale? It's called f***ing up. And now we arrive at the final game in the franchise, Skylanders Imaginators. I already made a video talking about the problems of this game, but I clearly forgot a few things, so time to make that right. But before we get into that, let's see if this game actually has some positive sides too. Being able to make your own Skylanders through creation crystals is a really fun mechanic, and something a lot of fans of the franchise would like to see. Customizing your Skylanders with different upgrade paths was already very fun, but now you can change pretty much anything. The other newly introduced characters were great as well. The senseis are ridiculously powerful Skylanders, unlike any characters before. This in combination with the fantastic combat of this game makes them incredibly fun to use. And they even made some Trap Team villains into senseis, which is some really good fan service. On top of that, this game also has quite a few amazing levels, Scholarville and Golden Arcade being some of my absolute favorites. The collaboration with Crash Bandicoot was pretty novel too, because Spyro and Crash are both very iconic gaming characters from the late 90s, so seeing them in a game together again is pretty sick. Unfortunately, that's where the positives end. Imaginators in a lot of ways feels like a game they put out just to cash in on the franchise one last time. As I said, Superchargers' story feels like a perfect ending to the franchise, which makes the Imaginator story completely redundant. And I mean, I wouldn't have minded if it actually was a solid story, but my god is it bad. The plot just feels like it was written for a 5-year-old, and yeah, Skylanders is a kid's game, but this is just insulting. and there's so much filler content in the game. The story only has 10 regular levels, but crams a shit ton of nonsense in between to reach a somewhat solid playtime. And yes, there are the Sensei realms and other expansion levels, but those you all have to pay extra for. It is absolutely ridiculous that more than half of the levels aren't playable if you just get the starter pack. What do you think, Eon? Oh my god, what did they do to you? Like, why does he look so disgusting? This alone is enough to run the franchise in the ground. And that's not even everything. The final boss fight is boring as hell too. In the last game we literally fought the darkness, and now we're fighting anime chaos? Like, what the f***? But the worst thing is yet to come. Because the senseis and Imaginators are ridiculously strong, the game is balanced with these characters in mind, so the enemies hit pretty fucking hard and have an ungodly amount of HP. And that in theory shouldn't be too much of a problem, except it is, because it means pretty much all your old Skylanders are completely useless in the game. I told you I'd do it! Like, giants are supposed to deal a lot of damage, right? In Imaginators it feels like they hit enemies with a napkin or some shit. The guys that are supposed to be some of the most powerful creatures in all of Skylands. This just feels like yet another way for Activision to squeeze out as much money from their customers as they can, and I despise it. Now, even though I hate a lot of things about this game, I still had a fair amount of fun with it. That might sound surprising after the rant I just went on, but Imaginators is still a Skylanders game, and it still has the feeling that's so unique to Skylanders. If you're already a fan of the franchise, you're still gonna have some fun with this game. Does it deserve to be rated higher than Spyro's Adventure and Trap Team on Metacritic though? Fuck no. And there you have it, my thoughts on every mainline Skylanders game. Now before I rank all the games, if you've made it this far, thank you so much. This video took a shit ton of work, so it really means a lot. If you enjoyed it, please consider leaving a like and subscribing because I'm planning to make a lot more videos like this one. I think now's a good time to mention that except maybe Imaginators, all the Skylanders games are very solid. So if your favorite game is low on the list, doesn't mean it's bad, it just means I didn't enjoy it as much as the others above it. Now then, in 6th, we've got Imaginators, obviously. 5th place goes to Swap Force. 4th is for Superchargers. In 3rd, I put Spyro's Adventure. In 2nd, we've got Trap Team. And in 1st, I mean, you all knew this was coming. The best Skylanders game, in my opinion, will probably always be Giants. If you disagree with my list or have a different game on top, please let me know your ranking in the comments because I'd love to talk about it with you guys. And if this video made you nostalgic, you'll probably be interested in this video about one of the most underrated Mario Party games, or this video about an Inazuma 11 game on the Wii you definitely need to play if you haven't.